Hi, I'm Grace Downs, and I decided to do my project on the ethics of surrogacy. And this is going to be kind of like a question and answer. So I have someone here helping me, asking me questions, and I'll be answering them.
What is surrogacy, and are there different types?
Surrogacy is when one woman carries a child, either for a couple or just a single person, and then once the child is born, that surrogate gives the child to the couple. So the woman carries the child, but it is not hers. And there are two different types of surrogacy. One is traditional, and that is where they use an egg from the surrogate, so the surrogate is genetically related to the baby. And the second is gestational surrogacy, and that is when the egg and the sperm both come from two different people, so the child is not at all related to the surrogate.
What is the history of surrogacy?
Surrogacy dates all the way back to biblical times. In the book of Genesis in the Bible, there's a story of Abraham and Sarah, and they were not able to have a child, so Sarah went to their servant Hagar, and they asked her to have their child. So Hagar was considered a traditional surrogate, and that is one of the first written down stories of surrogacy. Then in 1884, the first insemination, artificial insemination of a woman occurred, but apparently this was not a very ethical way of doing it. 1976, the first legal surrogacy agreement happened. The surrogate was not compensated, so she didn't receive any extra money or anything. And then the lawyer who brokered this, her name is Noelle Keene. After doing this, she decided to open a fertility center, which is called the Infertility Center. And this was huge in the surrogacy history because it really started moving things along and getting the word of surrogacy more out there. And this center has helped hundreds of couples be able to hire surrogates and have children through surrogacy. In 1978, the first successful in vitro fertilization occurred. And so that was really important too, because before this point, the only type of surrogacy that could happen was traditional, because there was no other way of being able to implant the egg into the woman. So having that in vitro fertilization was huge in regards of making gestational surrogacy possible. In 1980, it was the first legal compensated surrogacy. So that woman was actually paid for her surrogate services. In 1984 to 1986, there was something that happened that was really big for surrogacy. So it was the story of baby M. The surrogate was genetically related to this child, so she was a traditional surrogate, but she was also compensated for her services. She was given $10,000 from the parents, but once the baby was born, she decided she did not want to give the child up. So this was when a lot of legal actions started to happen with surrogacy regarding the surrogate being able to completely give up the parental rights and make sure that once the child is born, it actually goes to the parents and not to the surrogate. 1985, it was the first successful gestational surrogacy. So that's by using IVF therapy or to be able to take an egg from a separate mother and then the father and then implant that into the surrogate, so the surrogate is not related to the baby. And then it just, between the years of 2004 and 2008, it shows that a lot of people decided to start using surrogacy because 5,000 children were born.
In ethics, what are things you look for to decide if something is ethical or not?
There are 4 different categories that you can look at to make sure something is ethical or not. Those are autonomy, beneficence, justice, and then non-maleficence.
What is autonomy and how does it relate to the ethics of surrogacy?
Autonomy is the independence or freedom as of the will or one's actions, self-government or the right of self-government. That relates to surrogacy because like one of the huge issues with regarding anything concerning like human or women's rights is the fact that a woman can choose what she wants to happen with her body. And so with surrogacy, a woman has to have the right to be able to choose whether she wants to be a surrogate or not. And those rights have to be protected, otherwise it becomes unethical. So in countries like India, where their rights aren't always as protected, they can be, their autonomy can be taken away from them. So a quote from an article I read said, in India, the assisted reproductive technology rules in 2009 states that a gestational carrier must agree to relinquish all parental rights concerning the child and agree to undergo fetal reduction if she is carrying more than one fetus. So this is saying she pretty much gives up all of her rights to everything that happens to her body while she's pregnant during her surrogacy. And so if that, in my opinion, if that happens, she is not autonomous any longer, and the company who is taking care of her surrogacy program has control over what she doesn't or what she does do. So with autonomy, you have to be very careful, and it has to be very protected if it is going to stay ethical.
What is beneficence and how does it relate to the ethics of surrogacy?
Beneficence is an obligation to provide benefits to other people. So it's pretty much you are obligated to take care of another person. In surrogacy, I relate this a lot to the compensation that the woman would get. That doesn't necessarily have to be monetary compensation, but there has to be some sort of compensation for it to be beneficent, and make sure that that part of the ethical situation of surrogacy is taken care of. Like in India, they are given health care and food and shelter while they are pregnant, and so that would be that's along with their monetary compensation, but those other things that they receive would also be good enough compensation to cover the beneficence portion of ethics. In America, on average, a surrogate can receive between $35,000 and $40,000. I believe in India it's about $5,000 that they receive. So there is a huge difference in the amount of compensation that people can be given for this, and that can be a little unethical if you trying to put a monetary value to their services. But in America, they get money for healthcare, additional money for if they have multiple babies. They can also get money for travel expenses, and they even can get money for like maternity clothing. So a lot of their compensation covers a lot of the things that they go through. For beneficence to be ethical in this situation, they do need to receive some sort of compensation though. So if they aren't receiving anything, no health care, no monetary value, like nothing, then I would say that it was not beneficent.
What is justice and how does it relate to the ethics of surrogacy?
Justice is the moral principle determining just conduct. So this is making sure that people are doing things that are just, and people aren't treating other people in a way that isn't ethical, and this is just really holding people to those standards. So one of the issues in surrogacy can be that wealthy couples from wealthy industrialized countries can outsource to countries like India, where the surrogates aren't paid as much, so they aren't having to pay as much money for these services. And one of the quotes that I read from an article on the justice portion said the wombs of non-valuable women are used as breeders for the embryos of valuable women. So in this portion of surrogacy, you have to be very careful to make sure that all the women that are being surrogates are treated equally and they're treated the way that they needed to be, instead of treating them as just breeders for more valuable people. And this is when I believe kind of the monetary and making sure that the women are getting the needs covered that they need taken care of. So with justice, you have to make sure that there's an equality between the surrogates, and making sure that the people hiring the surrogates aren't really looking down upon the surrogates and saying this woman is just carrying my child and that's all she's good for. So you have to make sure that they're being treated the way they should be treated.
What is non-maleficence, and how does it relate to ethics of surrogacy?
Non-maleficence is the obligation against harming others. So that's pretty much just, you need to be nice and not hurt other people. So with surrogacy, I think this is honestly pretty simple. A lot of the times the people are very concerned about making sure that they have a healthy baby, because like every parent, they would want to make sure that their child was safe and healthy, and with that, the surrogate has to be safe and healthy. So I think they take and make sure that the surrogate is taken care of. This is also how compensation kind of ties into this, because without the health care paid for and all of those other things, they wouldn't be, there could possibly be something that happens to the surrogate that wouldn't be good, and so that would be unethical. So to make sure that they're taken care of is definitely something that has to happen. With pregnancy though, it's always very difficult, because no matter what you do, things could always go wrong. But I don't necessarily think that if there are health issues that occur, they are always someone's fault. Things just happen. So even if something does go wrong in a pregnancy, I do think that the surrogacy could have still been ethical, because it was something that wasn't able to be controlled by other people.
What is happening around the world regarding surrogacy?
Surrogacy around the world looks different in every country. Here in the US, there are some states that have legalized surrogacy, but the laws do vary state by state. And but the states that do legalize surrogacy, the laws in that state are very regulated. So it's a very regulated thing here in the United States. Countries that it is not prohibited in but not regulated in are Kenya, Malaysia, and Nigeria. And then in some countries you can, it's not legalized but it's not banned, so you can do it altruistically. So that's going to a friend or a family member and asking them like to be their surrogate, but there's no legal anything. And then there are some countries that it's completely banned in, no altruistic, no legal, nothing. And those countries are Cambodia, Denmark, France, Germany, Ireland, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Bulgaria, and Nepal.
After learning so much about surrogacy, do you believe it is ethical or not?
I believe that surrogacy can be ethical. If you make sure that those 4 points, the autonomy, justice, beneficence, and non-maleficence are covered, it can be ethical. If you make sure that the woman is deciding what happens with her body, if you make sure that women are being treated equally, if you make sure that they are being compensated for their actions, and you make sure that they're being taken care of, then I think it can be very ethical, and it can be something that's really good for people who really want to have children but can't. And so I think it's an amazing thing that could happen, but it can also be very unethical. If the woman has to sign over all of her rights and say, this is no longer my body, and people have to tell her what she can and can't do, if she isn't compensated anything, if she isn't given the right health care, all those things, it can become very unethical. And so if surrogacy is going to be ethical, I think it needs to be regulated to make sure that all of those things are covered, just to protect those women that decide to do it. So as long as those women are protected and they're taken care of, I do believe that it can be ethical.